Welcome. Hey guys. It's me, the guy who forgot to hit record, so that's pretty cool, but that's okay because we're here now. Today I kind of want to discuss a little bit about bans. I can kind of see where the BT16 meta is going, and I know it feels a little aggressive of me to say that I can kind of predict the future, but I think it's pretty obvious that Numon's going to be the best deck, and then Magnamon's going to be a huge gatekeeper for a lot of other decks in the format that would want to take advantage of playing against Numon in the current way they play. Followed up by another third deck that can potentially be the best deck, or potentially kind of fall out of favor a little bit, just depending on how the kind of builds that people are able to find, being Mirage Gaogamon. I think those are going to be like the three main contenders of the kind of decks that you'll be seeing throughout this BT16 format. And whether or not that's a good thing, I think is up for debate. But I kind of want to just discuss a couple ideas going on here. And so first things first, why am I making this video? Well, I was browsing Reddit today, as an avid Redditor does, and I saw this post. Now, I'm going to go over this post for a second. But before I do, make sure that if you do go find this post on Reddit, don't brigade it, don't send any harassment to the person who made it. I think that their ideas, while misguided or incorrect, aren't necessarily wrong per se. I just kind of wanted to talk about the topic as a whole, because I know there's been a lot of discussion over cards needing to get hit, or cards needing to get banned, or decks being too strong. I just wanted to give my two piece of like kind of what's going on. But essentially, the breakdown of this Reddit post is the person saying that they want Emissary of Hope, Blinding Ray, and potentially even Awakening into the Golden Knight hit, because those cards are enabling Magna X in Yellow Vaccine, and that's what makes the deck so powerful, not Magna X itself, and that Magna X is probably getting too much of a bad rap for what it does. And that's potentially true. I think that if you banned all those cards in Patamon, I think the Yellow Vaccine deck would cut Magnamon X from it, or at least have a lot harder justification running it at 4 copies because of how hard it actually would be to make use of the card in a meaningful capacity. So I think that they're not necessarily incorrect. I just don't like the thought process that kind of went into it, which is the idea of X card is really strong, so we should ban all the cards around it. That's not necessarily, again, bad. I think there are certain cards that definitely do warrant that kind of gameplay, but that I think stems from those cards being too strong or powerful. We'll kind of get into that. But first, give me a second. Sending harassment to the person who made it. I think that their ideas, while misguided or incorrect, aren't necessarily wrong per se. I just kind of wanted to talk about the topic as a whole, because I know there's been a lot of discussion over cards needing to get hit, or cards needing to get banned, or decks being too strong. I just wanted to give my two piece of like kind of what's going on. But essentially, the breakdown of this Reddit post is the person saying that they want Emissary of Hope, Blinding Ray, and potentially even Awakening into the Golden Knight hit, because those cards are enabling Magna X in Yellow Vaccine, and that's what makes the deck so powerful, not Magna X itself, and that Magna X is probably getting too much of a bad rap for what it does. And that's potentially true. I think that if you banned all those cards in Patamon, I think the Yellow Vaccine deck would cut Magnamon X from it, or at least have a lot harder justification running it at 4 copies because of how hard it actually would be to make use of the card in a meaningful capacity. So I think that they're not necessarily incorrect. I just don't like the thought process that kind of went into it, which is the idea of X card is really strong, so we should ban all the cards around it. That's not necessarily, again, bad. I think there are certain cards that definitely do warrant that kind of gameplay, but that I think stems from those cards being too strong or powerful. We'll kind of get into that. But first, give me a second. Okay, I'm back. So, bans, limits, and me. First thing you should know about me is I believe in hard commitments and consistency. Those are my two favorite things. I like it when a company really takes a hard stance on banning cards or limiting cards for specific reasons, and kind of having a consistent methodology. If a card is strong and is warping the format and they choose to ban it, I like it if there's reasons given, and I like it when they're kind of talking over the thought process of why they're doing a ban. Something I like about Digimon is they will at least explain a lot or give a lot of examples of why they choose to ban cards. Second, consistency. Not only with the types of bans that were given, but also in just decks themselves. I like it when my deck does a thing every game consistently. And I hate having to high roll. I really don't like decks that tend to have to be kind of high rolly. Those are just my opinions. This is kind of where I stay. I'm giving you this just so that way you know kind of where I'm coming from. I'm going to build up a little caricature of me so that way you can kind of understand where I'm coming from in this video. Next up, I hate getting sacked. For those of you who don't know what the word sacked means in context here, essentially you're playing a game and you're relaxing, and we'll use a card as an example, HPD. All right, you're playing against Bloomlord. All right, you've choked them to 1. There's nothing they can really do. They're down to like 3 cards in hand because you've done a wonderful job of controlling the board. You're a shoo-in to win this game. If they go into their Mega, that's okay because they won't be able to make use of it. They've got like 4 buys on field, but you have a Chumon out, so they can't gain the memory anyways. So like even if they have a Bloomlord, you're completely fine, and then they HPD you. Well, damn, there's not much you can really do about that. They HPD you, and then they swing in for 3 checks, piercing over one of your Digimon, and then, you know, they quartz you, or they just go in for game, or even they just HPD out their quartz. The main problem card in this scenario is HPD. It's a 1 of in a deck because it's limited, and it feels bad because you got sacked. Getting sacked feels awful to me. I hate playing a really consistent deck with a pretty high level of ceiling that I'm able to pilot really efficiently, and then losing because my opponent happened to just hit the nuts. And that's just the nature of card games. There's only so much you can do about that, and that's completely fine with me. I understand that it's the nature of card games. It's the burden that I wear by playing this and being in love with not just Digimon TCG in general, but just card games by and large. However, I think that taking steps to make it so that way those types of games happen less is good, and those are things I kind of want to see going forward in the future and just from the community as a whole. Next up, limits and bans. There is a distinct difference between these two, obviously. Putting a card to 1 to 2 to 3 in this game, or full out banning it from your ability to run at all, are distinctly different, and I think they are there for distinctly different kinds of cards. And we'll kind of go over examples of goods and bads, kinds of limits that we've seen, and kinds of bans that we've seen in the game so far. But we'll get there when we get there. Next, and the final thing that you should kind of know about me going into this is that I love pair bans. They're so good. I like it when a card who is only really problematic in combination with another card who is only really problematic in combination with, again, with that card. So essentially, there's no real problem card here. It's just there's actually a really weird interaction happening between these two pieces of cardboard that make it really difficult for other decks to kind of play around it or work with it or even have a good answer to. And I think that banning those cards from playing together make wonderful sense. Obviously, a overabundance of pair bans or limits makes the game itself really difficult for new players to get into because they may just not know. But if you're looking at the ban list and looking at the limit list already, you should be able to just see, oh, I can't play this card with this card, obviously. Now, for those of you who don't know what pair bans are as well, I mentioned it briefly. There was a recent pair ban with the Sayo and Co card from EX5, I believe, that they can't be played with cards such as like Keenan Crier and a couple others, like the Matte Structure deck card, because they provide a potential game state where your opponent never is allowed to play the game again. Which is, again, I love pair bans. Moving on. What are like problem cards? When does a card become a problem? Is it like the typical play rate of card? Is it when it becomes like too popular in the format? Is it when it's part of like a really strong deck? Well, I think all of those are kind of true. A card becomes a problem when I think a deck makes up too much percentage of a top cut and becomes too much percentage of a meta. I think it becomes a problem when a card enables a deck that was good to become even better to a point where maybe the card itself is the problem and the deck as a whole isn't the problem. I think a card becomes problematic if it gatekeeps a little bit too much. There's a couple other things, so we'll go into those. I think, is a card future-proof? Is a huge thing to kind of consider. when going into is a card problematic. For those of you who don't know what I mean by future-proof, a great example is Mega Digimon Fusion. It's HPD for level 7s that I think in the time that it was printed, there was a potential justification for it being fine. But as the game kind of evolved, it became obviously a problem that any future level 7 or level 6 that was able to make use of this card in a meaningful way immediately elevated that card's power by leaps and bounds. And obviously, sometimes we want that to happen. Sometimes there are really cool cards that weren't able to see the time of day from past sets that are now able to kind of come up and see really cool interactions. A great interaction here to think about is Dimension Scissor and the War Siegramon from, I think it's EX5. I could be wrong again. The idea of getting infinite memory on your turn is really cool. Is it future-proof though? Unfortunately, if that combo ever becomes actually viable, it will be really unfun and will probably end up as a pair ban going forward, or maybe even getting the Dimension Scissors card itself limited/banned. I think that's when a card becomes kind of problematic, is if it's not thought about what kind of cards may be printed in the future, and it's only done in a vacuum. And then the final thing I think when a card becomes kind of problematic is if it warps the format. So even if a card itself isn't part of the best deck, if it's making it so that way other cards in the format aren't able to exist because of how homogenizing it is, I think it becomes pretty problematic. We'll go over examples of cards like that in the future, but until then, here's some examples of good bans. Mega Digimon Fusion, I think, is a wonderful card to get banned. The idea of having this card at 1, so that way you can then have a infinite combo with Susanomon or any other huge, very, very quick level 7 by cheating out a level 6. Like imagine playing this in Numon, you can get a turn 2 Ruin mode for free. That's pretty insane, really disgusting, and I think would be a lot of unfun times for a majority of people involved. It's great that it's banned, because if it was at 1, it would be sacking people, and that would be a really bad time. Another great ban is the band pairs. As mentioned before, I love band pairs. This card obviously isn't problematic. However, there was a flaw in its design philosophy that let a air slip through where there were certain kinds of cards that weren't able to exist in the same game as this kind of card because they led to a very unplayable game state for your opponent. And the way they answered it, I think, was very elegant. Instead of just banning this card and kneecapping a already pretty struggling deck, they instead limited the kinds of cards that you could play together in those decks, which I think leads to a very, very healthy way of kind of resolving a very, very problematic situation. And going forward, any other cards that are printed along that sentiment that, you know, Sayo and Co. could then abuse could then just be added to like this growing list, or even just them not making more cards that Sayo and Co. can abuse in that way. But we'll save that for later. So what are some examples of good limits? Well, Shotmon Cross 4 I think is a wonderful limit. It's an exceptionally powerful card at the time that allowed, I think, a really prominent tier 1 format with Cross Hearts being the primary contender going forward. A great thing, by the way, that I forgot to mention that you have to kind of keep in mind is that we're not alone. It's unfortunate, but we are in a split format currently, which will be rectified at some point, which is wonderful, and I'm very happy for. But until then, this card was hit very early on in its lifespan for us. However, it was a problematic card because of how long it was so consistently good in the TCG, not the TCG, the OCG, which in turn led to its limit. I think that that's completely fair, first and foremost. I think a card that has been good for a long time and is still really good, even as you're pushing out new support for other decks, and it's kind of taking up game space. I think hitting it is completely valid and fine. The reason that Shotmon Cross 4 is a good limit, though, is because while it is a power card in of itself, and if you see it as your one of in Crossheart, it's not a blowout kind of card. It's a card that kind of just adds a little bit more consistency, a little bit more aggression. It's just a overall well-rounded good card. However, if you saw a Shopmon Cross 4 into a Shopmon Cross 4 into a Shopmon Cross 4, well, now at that point, the kind of interactions that you start seeing between these multiple copies of Shopmon Cross 4 lead to the card being even better. Essentially, you're just stacking advantages on top of advantages. And I think that cards that do that are good in a way to limit, where even if they're good individually, I think that if a card is really good in multiple copies of itself, then a limit may just be warranted if the single copy of it isn't so game warping that it completely changes the way a matchup is played. Another good limit is Tommy Hime, for very similar reasons. I think that a deck that was very powerful for a very long time, that saw a lot of play, that was, I think, for a lot of people, very unfun to play against in the style that they chose to go about things, with their aggression and their control factors and how easily it was for them to stun things. Limiting a card like Tommy to 1, I think, hits the deck hard enough that it probably isn't the best deck in the format anymore, but they still have access to Tommy and other cards like Tommy, so that if you still wanted to play the kind of deck that they were playing, you could do so. Tommy himself, though, in a single copy, isn't enough to win a game. He's enough to kind of see a good amount of value, but going forward, not enough. Falls into a very similar category as Cross 4. Slightly different card from those two, however, is Calling from Darkness. Okay, sorry about that. We were talking about Calling of Darkness. We're just going to pretend like I never said anything beforehand, so we're going to cut that part out, and we're going to start talking again. Sorry, someone was asking me what kind of coffee I wanted today. Calling of Darkness is a different kind of card from Tommy and Shoutmon because they provide a way to kind of cheat deck building constraints, which I think really good cards do. They allow you to kind of cheat the rules of the game and maneuver around them in ways that are unique. So Calling from Darkness allows you to add quote-unquote more copies of certain Digimon to your deck than you normally would be allowed to have. Specifically allows you to add 2 purple Digimon back from your trash, which is really, really strong. In a deck that needs, say, for example, Anubismon, and you mill all 4 copies of your Anubis, well, Calling of Darkness lets you have 6 copies, and one of them being in hand already. For 1 memory, just adding an Anubis to hand is really, really good. If you have 4 copies of Calling from Darkness, even if your opponent kind of tear through 4 copies of Anubis, well, now each calling is 2 Anubises there. It's 2, 4, 6, 8. It's 12 copies of Anubis that you have to deal with through the course of a game potentially. Yeah, and it's not just it doesn't just have to be an Anubis as well. It can be other utility cards or other kinds of combo pieces that you need to actually get to the Anubis that allows you to kind of to make use of the Calling from Darkness. That I think leads to the limit of this card being really nice. However, at 1, while it does add back 2 copies, and in purple there are ways to loop Lilithmon to loop your option cards. I think that having to go out of your way in order to loop Calling from Darkness consistently makes it a lot more difficult to abuse as much as it was being abused prior, as well as allows a lot more empty design space going forward, because Calling from Darkness was taking up a lot of cards that could potentially add back, like attaching those effects to Digimon may not be as attractive if you could just play Calling for 1 and get those cards back anyways. But I digress. Some examples of bad limits. As you can see here, I mentioned Bloomlord earlier, and there are a couple of offenders from Bloomlord on here. I promise you I don't hate the deck. I think the deck is really cool. I just dislike certain cards in the decks. I think they provide a very bad gameplay pattern. Starting off with the obvious one, Hidden Potential Discovered. I think that having a card that reduces a Digivolution cost by 5 for essentially no effect, no repercussions whatsoever, and the type of decks that play them anyways, makes it really difficult to kind of play around. Essentially, at any point your opponent can have a 6 memory hand to work with, 1 from the choking that you gave them, and then another 5 from a single card in their hand. It becomes very difficult to maneuver around. Even at 1, the card itself can be completely game warping and game determinative. And so seeing your opponent draw their single one of hidden potential discovered feels awful. And it's an auto include in a lot of green based decks just because of how well it actually synergizes with the color as a whole. Moving on to a very similar type of problem you have on the deck, Blossomon and Argomon. It's very apparent to me, at least, when I've seen the most recent couple of ban lists, that your opponent, that Bandai doesn't want certain styles of cards to kind of exist going forward. Some of them being like the Garurumon that was hit or the Grand Gaogamon that was hit because they presented a type of gameplay where your opponent built into it a stack in the back and then tried to kill you in a single turn. And then Blossomon and Argomon being hit because these are free evolutions that try to cheat the scale going up. And it's actually one of the reasons why Numon is so good is because Numon cheats a level 3. It doesn't need their level 3s to actually exist in their stack. They only need their 4s, 5s, and 6s to be able to compete in the game. Well, Blossom and Argomon do that in a very similar style. They don't cheat out the level 5s as a whole, but they cheat out the cost of level 5, making them essentially free. By suspending a Digimon, you can Digivolve for free. And that feels really oppressive. Again, getting into your level 5 for 0 memory usually takes some kind of effort from your part of having other extra cards in the deck or having some kind of synergy between the cards that you're already playing. But these cards don't require that. They do that in and of themselves, just by and large, rawly. If I have a Blossomon, I can just go into it for free on top of any stack that allows me to have green in it already. And the same thing goes for Argomon, and that's why I think these are kind of bad limits, because you still auto-include them in your deck. There's no thought process that kind of goes into it other than, oh, this is a free evolution. That's all I care about is getting into my level 6, so I'm just going to include this free evolution. And then finally, onto, I think, the last and most recent offender of this example of bad limits, Garurumon X Antibody. I think it was a very overtuned card and obviously was in need of some hits for purple, which is really unfortunate for the Garurumon deck because I feel like they themselves actually made, while good use of the card, it wasn't broken in that deck. However, it was really, really strong in purple-based decks that made it so that way it had to be limited, which is still bad, in my opinion. So allow me to explain a little bit about that. It's bad. Fuck me. Ignore that page. You didn't see that page, okay? Good. The reason it's bad is because it, again, is kind of like a Saki card. They can still play the Garurumon and Gabumon engine, but now, if they see this insanely powerful one-of, they get a draw 2, a potential memory gain, and potential protection if it's in the Garurumon deck. Whereas if this card was just banned, they could still play the Garurumon engine, they just wouldn't have this really sacky one-of that lets them set up their trash quicker, let them cycle through their deck quicker, and kind of do everything they really wanted. Whenever I was playing against some of my opponents in this current format, and I saw them hit the Garurumon X Antibody, it always felt really bad playing against Leviamon, and they hit it, because it's like, well, dang, that's a +1 memory, +1 draw 2, trash 2. That's everything you could have wanted in a card, and that just feels really oppressive for what I'm going against right now, because you just discarded a Levia X and a Leviamon, and you have the option card set up already, and now I feel fucked. And because you gained that 1 memory, now you can play out an option card or a Digimon for 3, choking me to 1 rather than giving me 2, which is the kind of cutoff point. And that feels really bad. I think that cards like this should all be banned. Send them to the gulags. Straight to hell with these guys, okay? No more sacking me. No more sacking me in general. I hate them all. The idea of these cards being able to just appear in your opponent's hand at any given point and allow them to get an insane amount of advantage that they would already be getting by themselves, full stop, I think should not be allowed. I think going forward, these cards are going to be auto-includes in decks that want these kinds of effects. I think any plant deck will include Blossomon and Argomon if they're already suspending. Same thing goes for Hidden Potential Discovered. And any purple deck is still going to use the Gabumon and Garurumon engine as a base, because why would you not? This card is already really good in that base. You're just going to include it. It feels really bad to me overall. Of course, these are just my opinions again. Please lambast me in the comments if you think I'm wrong. Now moving on to cards that kind of exist right now that people are discussing about should they be banned. Well, I think some obvious examples are Emissary of Hope and Patamon. Well, what do these cards do? Well, they both, in a way, cheat out memory for your opponent for very cheap cost. One of them being a Digivolve for 0 and then a Promote, and the other one being a 1-cost option card. And both of them have huge upsides that continue to get you value. They cheat core fundamental mechanics of the game as well by allowing you to look in your security and play from your security as well as from your hand. Is it problematic? I think so, yeah. I think that Patamon and Emissary of Hope both do something that may be a little bit too strong, and having a total of 8 copies of them available to you is really powerful. I think Emissary of Hope is a less offensive card than Patamon is, but if your opponent, draws the one of their 4 Patamon and is able to promote, go into a Rapidmon, and then go into Magnamon X on their turn 2, they've cheated out so far 4 memory from the Patamon, and then another memory because a card was removed from the stack, so that's 5 memory there, plus a draw, and then you put a card back in your security, which then stacks your security a little bit more. If they go into an Emissary of Hope afterwards, it costs 0 because they went into it for 1 memory and they got a memory off the Patamon itself. So far they've spent 0 memory, and they go directly into, I don't know, a level 5 or even, God forbid, a Magna X if that's allowed. I don't even know if that's allowed with Emissary. Fuck if I know. But if it's allowed, which it probably is, they've then cheated out another 5 memory. So they've now had a 9 memory turn on their turn 2 without using any of the memory that you gave them. That feels really oppressive. And obviously, that's not the best deck in the format, because there are ways to kind of deal with the Magna X that they end up on. But if they, say, go into a Venus on turn 2, you're locked out of the game, and if they start building a board again, that feels really rough. Or any other really aggressive level 6 yellow Digimon, they can kind of start going into that as well. It just feels rough. It feels rough. I think that a limit to either of these cards is probably warranted. I think that banning the Patamon seems like a bit overkill, and here's my explanation why. I think the Patamon requires a lot more setup when you're building your deck than, say, a card like HPD does, where you can kind of just hard slam it into your deck, and if you see it, you're really good. Patamon requires a certain number of level 4s, and then from that point, you have to be running TKs and stuff like that. You'd be able to manipulate your security to some extent in order to make it more consistent. Whereas if you just kind of shove this in a random yellow deck, it may actually not see that much use. I think it's a lot less generic than the average yellow card would you be able to play, and it's a lot less generic than things like HPD. The same goes for Emissary of Hope. I don't think this card actually needs a limit because of it being a lot worse than Patamon and requiring at least a little bit more setup comparatively to what the Patamon requires, especially if you want to make full use of the fact that it can recover post it being used. I think that card's fine. I think the fear of Emissary makes sense because of what's potentially possible for your opponent to do, but overarchingly it requires a lot of deck building constraints to actually make good use of. Patamon, however, I think requires a little bit less, and so a limit to 1 feels justified. However, I don't think it's mandatory in the current moment. Going forward, though, it does limit design space quite heftily. Any deck that does have powerful level 4s and cheating them out will, become really rough going forward. Numon. This is just talking about the deck as a whole. What's the deck doing? Well, it's the best deck in the format right now. It's been the best deck in the format since last format as well. It is able to get around the Guardian and kind of use it as like a guard dog now. And by what I mean by that is Magna X is like a gatekeeper, and he protects Numon from all the other decks in the format. It's using Magnamon like a hound on a leash, and is able to abuse the fact that it destroys Magnamon as a deck while still being protected from all the potentially other scary decks that could beat it because Mr. Magnamon is keeping those decks out of the format. Is that problematic? Yeah, a little bit. If that was all it was doing, then no, it's not problematic. However, if we look to the OCG, it's still getting a majority of the tops, at least up until, I think, EX7. We don't know what the EX7 format's going to look like, so it's hard to say whether or not Numon will still be the best deck in the format. But it's up there with the big dogs for sure. It's still top 3 in BT17. It's really aggressive. It makes use of a lot of really disgusting cards, like Edamon from the EX5, which is a problematic card in of itself. I should have added a picture here, but we forgot. Which is not future-proof for any future yellow or black aces going forward. It makes use of really great aggression with the Ukon mono package. It makes use of huge ability to stick to the board once it's developed with the Numon X. It makes use of huge control tools like Magnamon X that gets around different kinds of protection so consistently. The deck just does a lot. I think a hit to the deck is definitely warranted. I don't think any particular card in the deck needs to be banned. I think that just kneecapping a little bit of the deck's ability to actually hit those power pieces consistently or have those power pieces constantly available will tune the deck in a way that makes it a lot more fair. For example, limiting Magnamon X to 1 makes it so that way they are a lot less control-y and they have to become a lot more focused on their aggro game plan. Limiting a Numon X to 1 makes it so that way you have to really focus on having a more controlled style of gameplay, and you have to really focus on getting those Numon X's back from trash by hard playing your Magnamons, and so getting those platinum undulations become a lot more relevant in a lot of matchups. I think overall, a hit to this deck is definitely warranted. I think completely neutering it doesn't do much other than, I think, completely destroy the format by making Magnamon unchecked in any way, as well as killing one of my favorite decks, and I really enjoy Numon. However, I do recognize that it does deserve a hit, and probably a pretty hefty one. However, we talk about other cards that get hit going down the line here that already hurt Numon, so I think maybe just a limit is enough. Please be gentle to my children. My slugs and my bears are all that I truly have in this world as I'm recovering from my surgery. Please do not take them from me. Thank you, Bandai. Kisses. Next up, Mirage Gaogamon. Specifically talking about the BT11 version of the card, I think is where a lot of the power of this deck lies. What does the card do? Well, it's a top end to a very similar style of deck to ones that we've seen get limited before, being Wergurumon and the Grand Gaogamon that receive limits, because they are a stack-based deck that try to kind of build in the back and then kill you in a single giant OTK turn. Is it problematic? I think so. I think it's problematic in the sense that I don't think Bandai really enjoys decks that do this style of gameplay, as well as this style of gameplay is from before the new design director kind of took hold. So I think this card could actually see a limit going forward, unironically. Especially with a potential new list popping up using the Grace Nova cards as a bottom end, and then just using these cards as a top end that allow you to try and do that a lot more consistently. But other than being a stack that builds in the back, again, I think it's probably one of the better decks in the format, and I think it is, in of itself, unfun and problematic for a lot of players to play against. Not much else to say here. It's a very simple card in what it executes, being the single turn OTK, so there's not much I need to really say about it. On to some scary cards for a lot of people, being Ukomon. I include the big Ukomon here for a reason. I'll explain why in a little bit. Well, what do they do? Well, each of these Ukomon do something a bit unique. The level 6 provides a infinite kind of egg loop where you'll never run out of eggs and consistent removal. The BT16 Ukomon, baby form, allows for aggression, draw, and search power. all three of those things in a single card. That's really strong. The promo Ukomon provides aggression, draw, and memory gain. All three of those things in a single card. Is that problematic? Well, yeah. I think that the fact that these like little baby Ukomon work not only so well in tandem with each other, but also have kind of replaced a lot of the deck building decisions when it comes to the lower end of certain decks is really sad. I like them, don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of the draw power that they both provide. I'm a big fan of the consistency that the BT16 baby Ukomon provides, and I'm a big fan of the aggression that the promo Ukomon provide. However, I think that they in themselves are too oppressive when used in tandem. I think when used individually, they're very, very strong, but also still in a form manageable. I think having a BT16 baby Uko that lets you search in a deck that has a hard time actually finding core pieces, or is very prevalent in being like a huge combo fest that needs like 8 or 9 cards to actually be able to play the game and win it effectively, I think that's really cool. I think having rookie rush strategies that are able to make use of Ukomon is really cool. I love both those cards individually. It's when they make use of them together to provide such a huge aggression fest, such a huge advantage fest, that it becomes really problematic, especially since you have them at 8 copies total. You're able to see them really consistently. However, I also think that the big level 6 Uko is a really cool card, and it needs, I think, these cards to be able to exist in the format. So what I think I would personally do is I would do a pair ban and a pair limit. Now, what I mean by that, for the pair ban, it's pretty obvious. I would make it so that way the BT16 Uko and the promo Uko cannot be in the same deck together. I think that you have to choose one or the other, and so that way you have to decide, well, do I need more search power in my deck, or do I want more aggression and efficiency in my deck? Is going to be really impactful when it comes to deck building decisions. But they will be limited to be in the same deck together if you run 4 copies of the big Ukomon and maybe even 4 copies of a Louis. I think that would be really, really interesting. It would allow essentially a big Ukomon deck to still see some light of day as a nice little rogue niche without getting completely gutted by hitting the Ukomons, while preventing people from playing 8 copies of Ukomon in their deck without having to make some kind of deck building restrictions. Being forced to play 4 big Ukomon in Numon would feel really bad, especially if you play like 4 of the memory setter Louis as well. That's 8 cards you're now giving up to play another 8 cards. That's 16 cards of your 50 card deck that you now no longer have control over whether you want to play them. Whereas you can now have to make the decision between 4 BT16 baby Uko or 4 promo Ukomon, and have to figure out, well, do I want my Numon deck to be more aggressive, or do I want it to be more consistent in finding the pieces that it needs? I think that allows for a really unique style of gameplay, and so a pair limit with a pair ban feels the most applicable here, in my opinion. I do understand, though, the people who just want to see these cards completely banned, and so assuming a pair limit or pair ban doesn't happen, I think one of the Ukomon should be banned. I think it would probably be the promo. I think that one's the most toxic amongst them. The search, I think, is really good just for the health of certain decks in the game, whereas I think the memory efficiency allows it to cheat certain facets, cheat a little bit too hard. The Ukomon from BT16 allows you to cheat hatching and then search, whereas the promo allows you to cheat hatching and then cheat memory, both of which very, very impactful, and that's why I think that one is the one that deserves a ban if we were to give something anything. No limits here, though. Ukon is searchable in Magna X, blue base, because it's a free trait, and sacking into an Ukomon on your turn 1 will tilt me to no end. Now, on to the big bad boogeyman, Magnamon X antibody. Well, I feel like if you watched the video up until now, you should understand a little bit about what I'm going to say, but I'll do it anyways. What does it do? Well, it's a boss monster that is immune to your opponent's effects if certain fairly easy to meet conditions are met. attached to a big body that then provides not only defensive utility, but also aggression. Great. Is it problematic? Unfortunately, yes. Magnamon X Antibody, I think, is the most problematic card in the current format. Does it deserve a ban? No, I don't think it does. I think it could be limited. I think a limit to this card would be completely justified and needed currently for the format to enter, I think, its healthiest state. But also, I think a ban is a bit too much for this, I think, extremely powerful card. Allow me to explain. It's a level 6 that requires a lot of deck building constrictions that work really well with armor. The armor decks that we've seen popping up that haven't seen the light of day in a while. If we gut this card, I think it falls back down. It pushes armor back down really quickly to a more rogue / like tier 2 state, which feels bad considering that they just got the card. It still sees a lot of play going forward, however, so it does need to be hit. It's a staple card that some decks can just kind of plug and play because of the way they're built, whereas some other decks just build around it. It makes it so that way certain kinds of decks aren't able to exist. And what I mean by that is, I mentioned beforehand, it's a gatekeeper. Imagine the format as a castle in the sky, and there's a wonderful, beautiful crystal clear glass steps that you can walk up with your brand new deck that you bought. Say you bought the structure deck, Rapidmon, Double Typhoon deck. You take it and you walk up these crystal clear steps, and before you see a gate. And behind that gate, you see sitting on a throne a green slug that shifts between green and purple. And he laughs at you and throws poop at you because that's what they do, as standing in front of this gate is a giant golden gilded crystal mech. And you're like, oh, that's okay. If I want to get to the best deck status, I just got to get past this guy. Well, around the neck of this golden mech is a nice little leash, and that leash is connected to the hand of this little slug, and the slug commands the mech to go kill you to hell. And then it does, because there's nothing you can do against it, because unfortunately your deck just isn't built to be able to beat a 15k unaffected blocker that blocks twice a turn, that hits you twice a turn, that is almost always unaffected, that is a minimum 12k, and if you check it in security, it's going to be a minimum 15k because you swing in with the Magna, and then before battle happens, because you check security, it becomes 15k and unaffected. The only option you have is to hope for a option in security that can out it, or to play a deck that can beat it, like Numon X Antibody. And that feels really bad. It feels really bad that there's a single deck in the format that has completely homogenized and warped the entire thing around it to a point where no one can even contest Numon for the best deck, because there's no other deck that can beat Numon and Magna X except for Numon and Mirage. Going from what was, I think, one of the most diverse formats I've seen in Digimon to, I think, one of the most constrained formats that have completely warped itself around a single card is kind of sad. I like diversity. I like allowing a lot of different kinds of decks the ability to flourish. Seeing a couple rogue decks being able to top here and there feels fantastic. Royal Knights got like top 3 at the last BT15 Ultimate Cup, or the second to last BT15 Ultimate Cup. That's insane. No one would have expected Royal Knights to be able to top like that. Unfortunately, Magna X makes it so that way decks like that won't be able to see the light of day as much as they used to. That's just my opinion, though. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Please leave a like, subscribe, and tune in next time where, I don't know, I'll make like a mulligan guide. I don't know. Someone asked for that in the comments. That's so hard, though, dude. A mulligan guide is like a 2-hour thing. Like it's going so in depth. But you know, if you'd like a 2 hour video of me going over like specific kinds of hands and mulligans and stuff, let me know. All right, that's just, hugs and kisses. I love you guys.